So, I was like disappointed to see the massive spending bill, frankly, which increases the budget deficit, not just decrease it, and undermines the work that the Doge team is doing.
I actually thought that when this big, beautiful bill came along. I mean, like, everything he's done on Doge gets wiped out in the first year.
I think a bill can be big or it can be beautiful, but I don't know if it can be both. My personal opinion.
Welcome back to Posting Through It. I'm Jared.
And I'm Mike.
Thanks for joining us another week. I got to come up with something new to say when we open these episodes. But we've got a great episode with the tech writer that I've been reading for a long while. I think you guys will really enjoy it. We're going to talk about the state of the AI industry and why not all that glitters is golden. Just a reminder, we have a tip jar linked in the description. We are in production of the next Who the Hell Is episode. We know you guys love those. And because something is, must be terribly wrong with you all, we've received a couple requests for the next subject. And you know what? Damn it, we're going to do it. Who is it?
It's Nick Fuentes.
Nick Fuentes, what is wrong with you people?
You actually can't hear somebody eating their own boogers on a live stream. So that's the one thing we weren't able to get in there, but everything else. That is something he did, if you didn't know that. Okay.
Before we get to our conversation with Edward, we just need to do a vibe check on the state of the MAGA movement. And what got us thinking about this is Elon Musk. Over the last couple of weeks, there's been stories about him and interviews he's given where he's saying, I'm taking a little breaksy from this whole federal government thing. He's been sort of spearheading the Doge product, which at this point has laid off something like 250,000 federal workers, dissolved like 11 federal agencies, all to save an estimated $160 billion. Which is quite a far cry from the $2 trillion that they said doing all of this would save the government, because the national debt is something that these guys love to care about. So that hasn't been going well. And I think the impetus for a lot of these interviews is this spending bill that the Republicans have been trying to put forward, which would pretty much just offset all the savings that Doge could reasonably claim credit for.
Yeah, I saw on InfoWars today, Owen Schroyer was really worked up about that, and he kept saying that we don't give any more second chances. We're done of being lied to, in reference to the Doge cuts being offset. And it's funny because I think of like Musk and Doge as being just horrifically unpopular, and the most unpopular aspect of the whole Trump 2 world. But actually, I think from the diehards, like the real activists, they love this stuff. They really love the cuts, and for whatever reason.
Well, I mean, I think to them it's more about it's more of that animating sort of drive to see the people that you think are bad experience some kind of loss. It's
absolutely
what's it called? Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't pronounce it. I took German in college. I can't pronounce it.
Don't worry about it.
But I think they're excited just at the prospect that all these liberal workers who they assume are like purple-haired SJW types that have pronouns in bio or whatever, that's how they would talk about them, that they're out of a job and isn't that great. It doesn't matter that there's no material difference on their life, or that like this is setting things up for the world to become a darker, shittier place.
Or even a place with like more trash on the grounds of like, Arches National Park or something like that, right? Like it's just a shittier country.
Because of course none of these cuts were like to things that could save a considerable amount of money, like defense spending or whatever. It's all like you said, the people that pick up the trash at the national parks, or the agencies that like help us understand if it's going to rain this week or not. The nominally good things that the government does, those got the hatchet, right? So it's just ridiculous. But I'm curious. I mean, between that and some infighting that's been happening in the MAGA world that we've covered on some previous episodes, I mean, it kind of feels like the vibe is soured. I mean, I know you're like a big public opinion poll addict. What's the vibe? Is this just, are we projecting here? Or
I don't think so. Actually, the vibe feels to me very much like where Trump was in his first term before people got animated and angry about Black Lives Matter. So that was like in 2020, the COVID stuff was really big, and it really shook Trump's popularity, and the economy was really suffering. And what kind of brought him back, I mean, in some polls, he was down as many as 10 points, I think, to Biden. Pretty substantial. Now, of course, polls are always wrong around Trump, but we can safely guess that he was not doing as well as he was at the start of his term here in terms of popularity. This seems like what sort of picked him up and sort of carried him to a near win in 2020 was the backlash, of course, to Black Lives Matter and all the summer of 2020 stuff. That kind of was the wind under Trump's sails that brought him back. This feels like before that came along. It really feels like people are really fatigued. It's in the mid 40s. It's not as low as it was when it was in like the 39 range. And again, way too high. Like any number is too high. Yeah. It's like this guy
10% would be too high.
Yeah, this guy is a dictator game show host who has been credibly accused of rape. So he should not. No one should support this man. But whatever. There is a floor built in around Trump that is extraordinarily resilient, and sadly, I think it's somewhere around 40 and 44%. And I really think that he is at that line right now, and that means that people are kind of getting tired of it. And I think like the novelty of the second Trump administration is kind of dissipated a little bit. You can see it sort of like if you follow their little influencers and stuff like that. That guy Captive Dreamer that we covered on the X episode took his MAGA hat off for some reason. It just suddenly it's not this like badass vanguard, like whatever. Like remember Trump, like when people were hyped up to elect Trump again, they were gonna really show, stick it to the man. They were gonna elect a convict. Right? It was like really edgy. And now he's just normal again. And you're dealing with the usual chaos and clusterfuck of a Trump presidency.
Yeah. And that happened during the first administration too, right? I mean, it's just any presidential administration, you enter with the approval numbers you have, and barring some, freak occurrence of nature, it goes down generally. It's been a long time since that's been the opposite case, that people have like left office with higher approval than they had when they went in, because people are excited. They've been promised all this stuff, and naturally the promises are not fulfilled, or they fall short, or changes in the world, changes in society. Like people just kind of get bored or dissatisfied with the status quo and want something new, right? I mean, one of the biggest predictors of who will win the presidency, according to like Larry Sabato, who is a pollster who has been pretty correct. Like he has a pretty good track record of calling presidencies. But one of the things he says is you just look at public opinion polling on the state of affairs. Like, are people generally happy with the direction that the country is going? And that will tell you if they will ultimately vote to keep the status quo or replace it with something else. But this has happened really quick in the second Trump administration. Fast. This was a slow burn that developed during the first one, but the second, like now that we're in Trump 2, I mean, it hasn't even been a year, and it feels like that dissatisfaction, there's always going to be the MAGA diehards that will jump in front of a bus for this president who would spit on them if he had the chance. But like just more broadly in society, I think that sort of pivot point of like waking up from the dream has come much quicker than I think it seems like, surely that I expected, but it seems even that the Trump administration maybe expected. I mean, there's stories in the news every week about Trump calling up the DOJ and DHS and being like, where are the deportations? Where are everything they're trying to speed run has gotten like caught up in courts, and they might act tough, but they can't like reject all of it. Right. Yeah, not if they want to preserve the courts to use them when they want them. Yeah.
And the scandals that have plagued them have really been about Trump enriching himself, like through crypto and that whole thing. I'm sure that like I said, that block of people who seems to love Trump no matter what, they don't seem to care what he does, or like how he enriches himself with their money. But I can't imagine that the independents that voted for Trump like are particularly like thrilled about this. I mean, it's kind of the only thing that Trump has really accomplished in my mind is making us more inured to corruption. So in the middle of this whole Trump 2 term is the shadow that hangs over it is of course Silicon Valley. It is really it's surprising for how powerful and how wealthy the kind of power players of Silicon Valley are. It's almost underrated. We almost don't talk about it enough, how much this tech industry shapes our lives and shapes our politics. For that, we brought on Edward Ongweso, a tech writer who is really fantastic and really thinks about it and talks about the issue in a very philosophical way to sort of talk about AI. And I think it's a really good discussion.
There's a lot in the news about AI, and I know just enough to hate it. But our guest today, Edward Ongweso, knows a hell of a lot more than I do. Edward, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
I've seen a lot of headlines about the state of, I guess we're calling it the AI industry now. I remember in 2023, they were projecting that this was going to be like a multi-trillion-dollar business endeavor by 2033. Companies like Meta, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, they're pouring billions. I mean, Amazon says they're going to pour close to 100 billion into it. And it's all in anticipation that like once this technology gets perfect or something, that there's going to be some kind of opening for this mass consumer demand. And I don't know, like all I have to work off is personal anecdotes and like the people I know and how I feel about it. But does that demand exist? I mean, like, can you tell us more about this? Almost like it almost reminds me of like the space race to create the perfect chatbot or something. What's going on here?
I think the short of it is that the demand is not there, right? But because of how expensive the effort of building out a large number of data centers, constantly replacing and upgrading the server farms and chips, pushing the boundaries of artificial intelligence built atop large language models, there is a lot of effort in generating this demand, right? Some of the ways you generate the demand are through hype, insisting that a product that you're putting out is going to be able to revolutionize or solve a certain political or social or economic problem, do more work with less workers, get more insights into the development of drugs or prognosis for a health condition, be able to autonomously kill civilians or troops with drones. I mean, there are a lot of problems that people would like to solve ostensibly, and that firms are ready to say, hey, actually, artificial intelligence is going to be able to do that. So part of it is hype, insisting that you can solve these problems. Part of it is also more sort of as a marketing strategy, catastrophizing what's happening, right? And insisting that, actually our tools are so powerful that they might eliminate humanity, right? A good deal firms, namely OpenAI, do this and insist that, artificial intelligence is dangerous if it's not in the right hands. This works to funnel interest and money, investors into their arms. It works to build up connections with militaries and governments and government agencies that are interested in a technology that's supposedly so powerful might demolish the world, or that, implicit in that argument is it's so dangerous it might destroy things. But imagine how much more dangerous it would be in other hands, in the hands of geopolitical rivals. This is another important way to gin up demand. But I think also finally another way to gin up demand is to, as we saw most recently, kind of just over-exaggerate, overestimate it in projection, and just insist that you just need to keep building out the infrastructure as a way to get investors, capital flows, other firms hooked on or buying into, your enterprise, right? Get more venture capitalists and the pension funds that they represent bought in. Get more government agencies and public sectors and public authorities bought in. Make data centers or the leasing of a data center integral to some towns' hopes for generating revenue or attracting new workers or expanding its tax base, so on and so forth, right? So, ginning up hype, ginning up demand, catastrophizing about it so that it gets involved in geopolitics, and also getting public sector users as well as workers by forcing it onto them in workplaces are all integral to creating demand where there's not demand previously.
Yeah, I mean, even just a couple stories from the last week come to mind. Dario Amodi is projected, that as soon as next year, the first billion-dollar company with a single human employee, could emerge.
Right.
That plays into the hype. And then there was that story about how, they instructed some OpenAI model to shut itself down and it wouldn't do it. And it's like, oh my God, look at this. And it just kind of seems like a lot of news media and a lot of kind of writers that do cover this at big publications are kind of just biting this hook, line, and sinker. You don't, which is why I wanted to have you on the show. But, just generally kind of looking out on the way that this technology has been covered in media, or like how politicians seem to be bought into this idea. How did we get there? Because, certainly these models are getting more sophisticated all the time or whatever. But during the rollout, they weren't necessarily like that. They're still prone to hallucinations, and in certain contexts, that could be catastrophic. How did we get there? Can
I add to that question also? Just a very short thing that just to put on there, which is also why did it start to feel like all of a sudden we were talking about AI? Certainly the technology has been in development for a very long time, but it seems like all of a sudden this became a topic of discussion, which I think is a different way of asking what Jared is asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a really integral part of it is the way tech media has covered the industry, right? There have been cycles of hype and naive reporting of what tech companies insist upon, then failure and disappointment, or, the failure for things to materialize and disappointment with what does, and then some critical backlash, and then back to sort of fawning coverage, right? We saw this in the I think the most recent, hype cycle from 2000, 2007, 2008 to 2016, right? Where you have the great financial crisis, you have interest rates hovering at zero. You have Silicon Valley firms, venture capitalists, various financiers using this as a chance to drive hordes of cheap capital into projects that are unsustainable, unprofitable. But if you throw enough money at it, you can scale a monopoly. And you can use that monopoly to turn your speculative gains into real wealth, into political power, into restructuring markets, into building connections with government agencies, and to hooking consumers onto your products so that you can eventually, hike prices up and eventually grow into, so the parlance is grow into profits. Sometimes it feels like there's a short memory because we did go through this again. This is what we went through with Uber. This is what we went through with Airbnb. This is what we went through with all of these companies who were in the so-called sharing economy, right? This is also what we went through with social media. And, there was supposedly this techlash, this great disappointment as it became clear that social media firms and platforms had a corrosive, impact on our social relations, on our political order, on our mental health. But I think the way in which coverage tends to ignore the fact that private companies are concerned with, profit seeking and have little to, interest in social good, social welfare, except as a marketing strategy. The refusal to center that is part of why it comes back to bite us in coverage of artificial intelligence, because now we are dealing with, in a lot of cases, some of the same actors who are integral to these various hype cycles, or financiers who are integral to these hype cycles, insisting that this time things are going to be different, right? Because this time, this is a real technology that has transformative potential. But I think also people underestimate the extent to which, like you're saying, a lot of the technologies underlying this have been present for a long time. But the dialogue element of it, the chatbot element of it, really was a sort of genius move in terms of firms trying to figure out how to drum up general public interest in this sort of product, right? Because even though these things do not think, right? They are not sentient, they're not conscious, right? Even though these are just prediction engines at the end of the day, increasingly large and impressive ones in narrow domains, but prediction engines at the least, putting a chatbot in there, allowing you to have a conversation with it has done wonders for convincing people or allowing their minds to fill the blanks about what else it can do and to make other people's proposed visions much more likely, right? If you can talk about it, you start thinking about what kind of products and interventions can I make where other people talk to it? Can I put this in a classroom, right? Can I put this in customer service, workplaces? Can I put this in some sort of forward-facing public, part of a public entity, a public firm, and I use this to train other people. So I think the dialogue and having it be this faceless chatbot activates people's imaginations in a way that you weren't able to with other AI products. And also, again, recent events, past 4 years, where you've seen venture capitalists start to run out of runway, right? Because a lot of the large IPOs failed to materialize because they were, fundamentally unprofitable or unworkable business models. Large IPOs that would have been massive paydays for venture capitalists and the investors involved, scaring increasingly a lot of the funders from being able to find firms or find exits or find mergers or find acquisitions. And the whole business model of venture capital, for listeners who might not be familiar with it, is you have well-moneyed individuals and networks of individuals who are taking other people's money, charging a fee just to manage it, no matter whether or not there's a profit or not, whether or not they lose it all in the fire or not.
I'm in the wrong business.
Yeah, it's pretty lucrative, right? And then charging a cut of the profits, right? And usually a lot of this money is university endowments, pension funds, public money, right? And it's a relatively small pot. A relatively small group of investors are encouraged to hoard larger and larger sums of money and direct it into, the same overlapping group of funds, right? The vast majority of investments do not yield out anything, right? They are bunk or you lose money on them. A few are neutral. And the idea is that that 1 to 5% of the investments you make are supposed to pay back for everything and more and realize excessive returns. Investing in some sort of potential future tech titan that's going to dominate some key part of digital economy or the value chain or the supply chain. So, venture capitalists for the past few years, since the Great Recession really, have been taking advantage of these low interest rates to pile as much money as possible into things that don't work, knowing that someone is going to merge with the company, acquire the company, or let the company go public. And as that has started to narrow and as that runway started to come out, there's been anxiety about what the next products, what the next sectors, what the next, category of tech would yield the sort of excessive returns that they're interested in. For a while, it was crypto. For a while, it was Web3 and the metaverse, if you guys remember. That shit.
Yeah.
But just to ask a stupid question about that you interjected. In my mind, the metaverse is kind of blends in with AI. Is there like, am I wrong? It's sort of, is there sort of like a link between that and crypto? It feels like it's all part of the same thing, right? It was like sort of like,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. I would say so, because I would say, these firms, a bunch of these firms, Facebook probably the best example of this, changing its name to Meta, right, as part of this move to signal how the future was the metaverse, were promising to spend tens of billions, if not $100+ billion on the metaverse, on building out this digital reality that would have every inch of it turned into a microtransaction or a commercial exchange, right? And that this would be an incredibly lucrative opportunity, both for firms, for advertisers, but also for consumers, because now, anything you make is going to be transactable. Or anything you do is transactable.
I remember people trying to sell real estate in the metaverse.
Insane.
Yeah.
Insane.
Well, one of the cryptos that was doing, I can't even remember what it was called at the time, but I was reporting a lot on crypto, and sadly, I actually bought some. Not of this. I was buying Ethereum, but I had to learn, right? I like to experience.
Yeah, right.
I play with chatbots and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. One of the things that was being sold was a cryptocurrency that was for a future metaverse reality that never really formulated. So people were buying kind of shares of a kind of currency. I can't remember what it was called, but it was like a share of a currency for a world that never really got built, if I recall correctly, or never got finished. Just weird. That's why I said it's like, it feels like it's sort of like a muddy terrain between all three of those things.
I mean, I think there's a strong link. I think you're right to point that out, because it's like the financiers. So a lot of the financiers are involved. A lot of the software engineers are involved, right? A lot of the, the VC funds, not just the VC investors, but the funds themselves are still involved. I mean, A16Z, I think, is probably one of the best examples, right? One of the largest venture, if not the largest venture capital fund, has a massive crypto fund, and was hailing the metaverse, right, and Web3 as the future of the internet, the future of art and cultural production, the future of social relations, right, the way to solve the loneliness epidemic, right? And now they're saying that chatbots will be the way to solve that. But I think, what all of these share is this anxiety about where are we going to get the excessive returns, right? One, because they want the money, and two, because the excessive returns are a way to get political power, which is a way to make sure that you can continue to get more of the excessive returns.
I have one more sort of question about the business part, and then I want to talk about sort of the power dynamics behind AI, kind of pushing AI, because that's something you've written a bit about that I just find really fascinating, and I'd love to get your thoughts on. But is there a risk that like this blows up? Like I also read Ed Zitron, and he's always saying that this is a bubble. It's going to pop. These venture capital people, like eventually, these business models are insanely expensive, and they don't have a real answer to turn it around and make money. You see companies wheeling out all kinds of stuff, whether it is Mark Zuckerberg saying that, their chatbots are going to replace people's friends, and think of the opportunities there. Or you have Nick Clegg, a former Meta guy, saying that, well, geez, if we had to ask artists for permission to ingest their content, that would kill us. Or, AI, OpenAI, I guess, is developing some kind of consumer product that it is going to put an AI assistant in your pocket, I guess, is the idea. They say they're going to make 100 million of these. They want them to, the story I read says, he hopes they will become a part of everyday life. 100 million devices, that's like way more than the iPhone sold in the first years it was out. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's just, to me, I just read this stuff and my brain screams, scam. But I guess it's what you're talking about. People are just kind of rolling the dice and willing to accept some risk if one of these things hits. But is there actually a path forward, besides these companies just forcing it on all of us, where this technology actually does achieve, the place in society a la the smartphone that the people running these companies are raising untold levels amount of money with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the more or less how it's going to go, is that there's a bubble in that there is far more money being allocated into this than any conceivable problem solving or value generation can be expected, right? And that the trillions of dollars people are talking about needing to build up the infrastructure so that we can give birth to our AGI God, right, are going to just in reality be trillions of dollars spent enriching the firms that are controlling the infrastructure, developing and designing the chips and holding the data, the models, and deciding what companies get access to them and licensing them out and partnering with the government. But I also think, and I think Zetron is really great on this, right? If there's a bubble and it bursts, this will be a disaster, because if me and you are trying to ask, over the next 10 to 15 years, if we have $7 trillion, what is the best way to improve humanity, not just in the United States, but across the world? There are a lot of things that we can come up with. And if $7 trillion gets wasted, and this is, I think, also one company's estimate of what they would have to spend. There's OpenAI's assessment of what it would have to spend to build out the infrastructure so that it could have the product itself. This is not including what every other company in, total is going to probably have to spend. But if we're saying, let's spend $7 trillion, we probably would not say, let's spend $7 trillion on building out the infrastructure for a series of data centers, for, the mines, and for the transport and the electricity and the water, the water that we need to, to guzzle it in, and the methane power generators and so on and so forth, right? We probably wouldn't spend $7 trillion on building out that infrastructure, on figuring out how to build out products, on financing workers to help do it, on exploiting global workers in the global south, so on and so forth. Probably spend the $7 trillion, on figuring out what to do about existing institutions, about providing, direct cash payments to people to improve their quality of life, make sure that they can eat, make sure that they can, live, maybe get access to knowledge that is locked behind some barrier for them, digitizing, so on and so forth, right? There are a lot of things you could immediately do that might have a more immediate impact on this promise of trying to improve whatever it means, trying to improve the intelligence of humanity, right? Which is embedded in this quest for building AI out. I think that, the bubble bursting would be a massive disaster, right? Not just because it would impoverish a great number of people, right? But because over the next few years, and you're seeing it already, universities, public libraries, hospitals, workplaces all across the economy, government agencies are going to be partnering with these firms to use their product, building up infrastructure around it, centering it into their operations, being expected to pay more and more to get access to something they're being, lured into getting addicted to. And if it blows up, what is the point of that? How much money, especially public money, is being wasted on enriching and transferring wealth into a bunch of oligarchs and their firms that are interested in organizing a political order that is not going to actually make the world a better place, but is going to make it easier for them to make money and make political decisions and reshape markets in ways that make it easier for them to, again, make money and make profit and realize political order, restructure political orders. If it doesn't burst, I also still think this is a bad scenario because we are evading, because if it doesn't burst, I feel like this will be read as proof that this model works, and we will lose the opportunity to ask the deep question, which is, should we have a political system where we let Silicon Valley privatize the ability to solve large political and social problems under the pretense of being the only ones who are developing technologies that can do so, right? Should we let the people who came up with fart coin, should we let the people who came up with the metaverse, should we let the people come up with killer drones? Should we let these people come up with all of these socially odious and deleterious products that are beneficial in very narrow use cases, but also beneficial because the public versions of them have been sabotaged, by many of the same people? Should we let these people decide, where our public funds are going? Because our public funds are being used on subsidizing their private ventures and their private profit making. And
So
I don't think so.
I have a question about that, actually.
Mhm.
Is it a foregone conclusion that this technology, when you mention these different sectors using these things, the first thing that comes to mind is like chatbots, where it's just sort of like it's helping you along. You no longer can get a customer service person anymore, and then it's just always just like a large language model like trying to tell you what you want to hear. Is it a foregone conclusion that these things are definitely going to get better over time? Like they're definitely going to get better, or is there a chance that it'll kind of stall and just remain relatively clumsy? I say that because it's like I played a lot with chatbots. I played, because I did a story about romantic chatbots. You talk with these things, and there's always like it's fun, right? You're having this thing, and all of a sudden they start to say something that makes it very obvious that there are limitations, and it just cannot get over certain things. It can't hold two ideas at the same time, right? Because people are complex, right? Like we were talking about Kanye West before, or Ye before this. Like, how do you explain that to a chatbot if you try to make a character of that? Like, it's very difficult. There's a lot of different, it's trapping a bunch of things, ideas that are contradictory at the same time in his head. Is it possible that this technology may not get better? And then if that's the case, then are we going to be just stuck with a lot of broken conversations that are very, very expensive?
I mean, this is this is a $7 trillion question, right? What are improvements going to come by throwing larger and larger computational resources at this, so that you can have larger and larger data sets with larger and larger number of parameters, and increasingly more powerful chips? Is that going to be the thing that allows us to throw enough compute at a problem so that it may appear to be increasingly sentient? Or are we going to discover new techniques and shortcuts along the way that augment or surpass LLMs as a foundation? Or is there a hard limit, and that we're just simply not going to be able to replicate human intelligence? Or, and this is also another point, are we also just going down a dead end, right? And I fall into the latter path, which is that, artificial intelligence, I do think, we are going to get increasingly more impressive and spectacular demonstrations and products, as we have been doing so for the past few years. But what are we actually interested in developing? Because human intelligence is not simply just the ability to predict what someone is going to say next, to be able to hold a conversation with someone, right? I think that is the narrow dimension that we're interested in, because really what they're interested in is figuring out how to, solve the labor question. How are we going to figure out a way to maximize productivity and zero out labor costs, ostensibly so that we can do the sort of research at a high speed or high level that would allow us to radically improve human livelihood, solve climate change, redistribute or allocate resources properly, so on and so forth, right? But human intelligence is not just like solving problems. It's also creativity, it's also displayed just idle thought and boredom. I mean, there are all sorts of mental states that are never, ever thought about as what a chatbot or any sort of artificial intelligence should replicate, because what you're trying to replicate is, or what you're trying to solve for, is labor, right? What you're trying to replicate is the design of labor, the schematic of labor. I do not want and think it is a bad idea to let some of the richest people who've ever lived take as much power from the state and from the public as possible, enough as much wealth from both as possible, and as much data from both as possible, to privately develop the perfect schematic, or what they think will be the perfect schematic of labor to achieve whatever ends they want. I think that just sounds like a nightmare for me. That sounds like the worst form of, that sounds like the capitalist direction or capitalist hellscape on steroids, right? So the question is, how do we undermine all this, right? How do you contest this? And that is also a big question, right? Is it something that, do people have to articulate alternative visions of computation? Do you have to take advantage of potential walls that it might hit, as it becomes as it becomes clear we might not be able to surpass some sort of benchmark? Do you simply have to, forcefully articulate this, whether with like a program that figures out how to decentralize it or to seize the assets or so on and so forth, right? But I think that, to circle back to your first question, right? The question about how we, if we're going to hit a limit, is also part of a larger question of like, well, what are we interested in? What, are we going to let these individuals pursue their dream, or should we try to investigate what forms of AI would actually be socially productive and beneficial, and not just fancier forms of surveillance and social control and labor discipline and war automation, right? And force projection, which are the main forms of AI that are being developed right now.
Yeah, let's talk about their dreams a bit. Actually, that's the perfect segue to kind of where I wanted to take this next. A lot of the, those hyper rich sort of tech guys, right? As you said, some of the richest dudes that have ever lived. The way they try to sell this technology to the public is, a very familiar tune. That with the advent of this technology, it's going to revolutionize humanity. It's going to be, akin to the next industrial revolution. People are going to be freed up to pursue creative endeavors, and, humanity will flourish. It will be a new transformative age. It sounds very idealistic, right? It's very aspirational. But you've written kind of about that vision and what it has actually looked like in practice. So, this idea of changing the world with technology or whatever, some people might find that exciting or new. But, as you've already pointed out, ultimately it puts the control of that new world in a small number of hands. And you've written about how this kind of technology can actually be sort of an oppressive force. So I would be curious to hear more about your thoughts about how, this amazing new world of where people can just outsource all the boring things in their life to a chat bot and spend time on stuff that matters or whatever. Like in practice, that's not really, if you look at the contracts that are being inked, how the State Department's using it to figure out who they want to deny visas to, or people trying to get this technology into the Pentagon, or it already being used by Israel to do targeting of people. Like this vision of, AI will like free humanity. I'm curious your thoughts on how it might actually do the opposite.
One of my favorite writers on this is Evgeny Morozov, who kind of talks about how, if we're talking about artificial general intelligence as the dream here, this idea that it will be able to optimally organize humans and their labor and the resources they produce into the best possible outcomes, this more or less just sounds like what, neoliberals and capitalists more generally mean when they talk about the market, right? And so it's hard to imagine how, or maybe it's a clarifier in thinking about how, a lot of the visions that we're really talking about, that these people articulate when they're talking about liberating humanity, so on and so forth, are within that prism of, through a sort of market technology or market logic that will allow you to be your best self by finding the freedom or the time or the leisure to market yourself, or to find people willing to purchase your labor, or find people willing to fund your creative exploits. And instead of the market, it'll be artificial general intelligence that will be operating whatever social coordination mechanisms at play here, right? But I think that the core visions are these kind of this is an old one that is in Silicon Valley. I think more generally in American political elite culture, which is like this contempt for general public, for democracy, for the tendency of large groups of people to to intervene in the optimal development of politics, of technological progress, of cultural production, right? And this idea that if you really want things to move fast, if you really want to progress along to the best possible outcome, you have to free capital as much as possible. You have to decouple it from democracy, right? You have to peel back regulations. You have to peel back oversight. You have to empower central executive decisive authority. And you also have to empower, not just capital, but the capitalists, the people who are, allocating it so that because they're the ones who are on the frontier, they're risking their own money, right? They need to be free to make these decisions on the snap, right? They need to be free to gamble with other people's money with their own money or whatever people want to call it. I think that's part of it, which is like this anti-democratic streak, which has always been an American, elite culture, and specifically in Silicon Valley, and the suspicion of democracy as a infantilizing force, as a political order that is noble, and of course we want to believe that everyone is created equal and should be able to pursue whatever life they are, but of course we don't believe that. And some of the reasons they don't believe that is because a good deal of them are skull measuring freaks, right? They're phrenologists, they're eugenicists, they're racist nuts. Some of the people who believe things that have never been said out loud before, right? In the history of our humanity. And so part of it is, for them, democracy is just frankly incompatible with their worldview, right? You cannot have a healthy political body if you have all these masses of people who are inferior to one another, not only coexisting, but having a say in the way that our society is moving forward. Part of it is also that they think there's also other groups of people within that sort of racist and eugenicist tradition. There's some who think that maybe by using this technology, we can go about some sort of eugenicist campaign that will uplift all of humanity to have a higher IQ, and so on and so forth, right? So I think that's one thread of the visions that worry me. Another thread is that I think there is a real effort by capitalists who realize there's a bit of a legitimacy crisis, right? After the great financial crisis, after the disappointment of Silicon Valley's sharing economy, after the scams and scams of crypto, so on and so forth, there's this legitimacy crisis where there's been a failure to articulate or present a future for people and also provide them with some sort of gains where their lives are actually getting better, right? And I think that because of this legitimacy crisis, some people do believe that you have to, if we have to choose between democracy and capitalism, we have to choose capitalism. We have to choose the system that in their eyes has generated the the standard of living that we have and the material abundance that we have in some cases, right? And so they view their task as figuring out how to regenerate or reinvigorate capitalism. And part of that is rolling back the past few decades of democratic reforms that they think are responsible for making it lethargic. Civil rights, labor rights,
those pesky things.
Capital. Yeah, those pesky things, right? Healthcare, environmental protections. And frankly, AI would be, as is the technological sector, a great frontier for realizing that. One, because you can outright say just having regulations on these things makes no sense because they limit progress. And besides, when we create the AGI at the end of history, we'll be able to figure out the perfect solution and the perfect balance of nature and urban, or the perfect allocation of healthcare, the perfect political system, so on and so forth. But also because, it's through artificial intelligence that you could, some of them will, maybe like Larry Ellison from Oracle say, we can finally achieve the sort of surveillance and remote control and social discipline and workplace supervision and force projection and automation of police and automation of military forces that would allow us to neutralize the pesky elements of democracy and prioritize the parts of our capitalist system that lead to progress, that lead to new technological innovations, and that lead to higher standards of life, right? And that if we can just set aside the civil liberties, everything will be fine, right?
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people think about the surveillance aspect, right?
Mhm.
Because for these, software programs to work, they have to be just constantly ingesting data. And if you have a little chat bot at work that
I was about to say, I think about it. It scares the shit out of me.
that,
Every time I use one of those things.
a little chat bot, that pops up in your email to say, oh, you need some help writing that email, or, oh, hey, just a reminder, 3 days ago, you got this little message from somebody. They're waiting on you. I mean, they can sell it however they want, but in some context, it's also just like a tiny cop following you around in the workplace, right? I mean, it's just, the surveillance potential is wild. Today it was in the news. I guess Elon Musk got his chatbot integrated with Telegram, and I was just like, "Whoa, farewell to that."
Yeah, right.
that platform. I don't think anybody. He had to pay Telegram to take the chatbot, which was pathetic, but tells you all about,
He's a good cock, he loves he loves that sort of stuff.
Can you speak more about just the sort of new and exciting avenues for being surveilled by the government, your employer, or whoever else may not have your best interest in mind?
I mean,
this could open.
Surveillance is a really integral part of capitalism. I think is also constantly forgotten, right? I mean, surveillance stems back to the origins of it. I wrote a piece that was referencing this book, I and the Master, and also this essay by Meredith Whittaker about how the origin of computation was in response to the fact that the British Empire had abolished slavery and was now faced with the very big question for their empire, which is, slavery yielded stupendous amount of wealth. How do we replicate that sort of extraction and wealth creation in industrial labor settings? And so the origin of computation was these theorists trying to envision systems that would allow you to make the task of surveillance, of punishment, of extraction, of productivity maximization, and of division of labor as close to or as inspired by the plantation organization as possible because of how successful that system was, right? And this goes from, quantifying the work that people are doing in industrial factories to allowing people to spy on one another, report on one another, to figuring out who to arbitrarily punish, as an example, to scare other workers into writing, as well as the way to intervene into groups or how the level at which workers should be allowed to congregate at risk of organizing, right? And in ways in which to crush the labor, right? So origins of computation have been concerned with surveillance in the labor element, right? And surveillance itself has been integral to capitalism since World War II, where you have questions about, okay, how are we going to prevent a Great Depression? Well, we have to convince people that they need to consume at a higher clip. Well, you have to surveil them so that we can generate data about them as consumers so that we can, figure out how to market to them better. How are we going to, when that starts to dovetail, how are we going to manage this upswell in dissident activity in this country, right? Well, you have to develop electronic surveillance systems so that we can keep track of dissidents and so that we can be able to crush it. And how are you going to, as the turn of the century approaches in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and as financialization kicks off, how are we going to synthesize increasingly more complex and abstract financial products, which are going to be integral to the economy? Well, surveillance is going to be important to just collect data, right, on them and allow people to collect data on all sorts of events and all sorts of products and commodities so that they can trade on them. So the creation of large data surveillance infrastructure has been happening for a long time in the background to preserve the degree to which people can exert control over new markets, create new markets, get information about them, generate finances and returns. The age of these artificial intelligence technologies coming in and requiring large sums of data more than probably exists, and also tainting the past pools of data that other firms might come in after the fact and use because now it's filled with AI slop, right? Means, is one of the things that's going to incentivize more surveillance, right? What better way to generate the sort of data that might give insights necessary to help train these chatbots and other generative AI products to more resemble human behavior than to leverage connections and partnerships with governments and public authorities and agencies that deal with humans in one-to-one spaces, if you can replicate that with the chatbot, right? And using that insight at large. Or, what better way to sell your product also, if it's a product that is going to be able to ostensibly think at the level of a human or close to a human, as a way to make connections through surveillance data that you already are sitting on, that everyone is sitting on, because everyone is an advertiser now or a surveillance or partner in surveillance. What better way to take use of the data, right? A lot of people are encouraged to collect data because they might be able to make use of it for advertising or marketing, but now you'll be able to use it for surveillance that might allow for finer tuned targeting of consumers, as well as offer that a robust addition to the dragnet that we've been building, right? So I think the surveillance angle really is forgotten because people do forget. They collect everything, they hoard everything. Of course, they claim that in one way or another it's not going to be used against you. But even if it's not being used against you, the concern is everything being organized and structured to collect as much data on everyone as possible is not good.
No.
It's just not good. And we should not be organizing a civilization or society around that being the premise of a supposedly transformational, epoch-defining piece of technology, which we are going to forcibly integrate into every workplace, every public space, every private space, every enterprise, every government, right? Surveillance in of itself has been too important and too valuable, but I also don't know how you block it, frankly, right? Because of how much everyone either forgets its existence or is fine with it and rationalizes it in one way or another.
I wanted to. We moved very fast over some very deep topics here, but we did talk briefly about, lack of a better word, the white supremacist nature of some folks in tech and that sort of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we saw recently Elon Musk use, or whether it was intentional or not, his Grok thing started to spit out this stuff about white genocide in South Africa, right?
Yeah.
Very normal. Cool. I love the internet. Thank you, chatbot.
And I don't know if there's actually a term for this or not, but there are these kind of like activist billionaires, like reactionary billionaires, who are kind of using their prodigious wealth and influence to try to steer the world in, I guess, a more white supremacist direction, or at least a more fascistic direction. And I guess, how concerned should we be about how AI could use that? There are a lot of potential ways that AI can be used to exploit humans' emotions, things like that. There are chatbots that obviously are supposed to interact with people romantically or as friends. But even chatbots that give people advice about things, medical advice, things like that. I mean, small tweaks to these algorithms could potentially, have a huge impact if you're using them at a wide scale. I don't know if that's something you've given much thought to, or if you have a response to it. But I just the example that I think of at how effective this could be is, we remember how bad Twitter was before Musk bought it, and I refuse to listen to the people who were, to talk about it like it was some sort of wonderful website before. It was always, it produced nightmare fuel, even if it was more pleasurable for us. But now if you look at it, I mean, it really does take people who are already kind of bad and make them worse very quickly. You can just see it happening. I don't really post on there anymore. I just use Blue Sky, and I barely post on Blue Sky these days, quite frankly. I think I'm just getting bored with social media. But X, like the For You tab, it looks like nothing like you would have seen on Twitter. It's very clear that he saw what was sort of working in terms of radicalizing people, and he pushed it in a direction to make it worse, and it was effective. And I think it was probably played a not so insignificant role in electing Trump. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are about how this technology could be used to further the interests of people like Musk.
I mean, you know, one way to think about it is we already live in a world that has horrible, little to no protections in terms of if a corporation or state wants to put you in the crosshairs, right? Whether it is from a regime that is interested in doing mass deportations, or to the fact that our geopolitical relationships are such that we're giving, you know, arms and death machines to other countries, you know, freely. There's not much there to prevent instances of both overlaid with artificial intelligence from coming back to attack people or hurt people.
I mean, there was that Gallup polling and that they put out. I think this was like a month ago or something, where they found that overwhelmingly the public was kind of uneasy about AI, and were like, oh, well, it's the government's job to protect us from it. And I was just reading that and thinking like, oh, my sweet children.
You know,
I don't think you understand what's happening right now.
It's gonna be bad. I think it's going to be bad for a lot of reasons, right? Partly it's just because the world, as we know it, is going to be undergoing basic changes, ignoring artificial intelligence or whatever technological developments, right? The refusal to do much of anything about climate change is going to yield pretty transformative and devastating consequences for most of the world, right? Whether it is the complete collapse of various, cities or countries, or massive migrations, and I'm not optimistic about that for the basic level that, you know, even the small migrations we've had have managed to turn regions of the world like Europe into, to widely embrace a lot of these skull measuring freaks, right? Adding artificial intelligence to the mix that's being developed in directions where it's being grafted onto weapons to generate kill lists to kill as many people as possible, or to augment network analysis so that you'll be able to find and deport as many migrants as possible, or to hoard as much data as possible, or to construct, as 404 Media has reported, to construct, to aid in the construction of these, fake social media profiles, to infiltrate, social movements and dissident circles, right? Already there's not a good, things are not going in a good direction, right? The fact that these oligarchs, who are, especially so many of them, are connected to South Africa or and its former apartheid regime, are connected to reactionary modernist movements that really do not believe democracy and capitalism are compatible and want to choose capitalism over them, who believe technological progress should be prioritized, who believe that the state should be broken up or shackled, or that sovereignty should be challenged, and that all of our resources and all of our attention should be focused on prioritizing their ability to make technological progress happen. This is all nightmare fuel, frankly.
Yeah.
So I think if things continue as they are, the best you can hope for is these people following the route of Musk and becoming too demoralized or too depressed to involve themselves in the political activities anymore. But that's not going to happen, right? Because most of them are not Musk. Like everyone who's not railing ketamine all the time is not going to be that depressed when their government venture doesn't work out. They've been at this longer. They have a longer horizon and vision of it than him, and they've been successful. Right? Peter Thiel, for example, his acolyte is a vice president, and he's gotten many of his other acolytes into key positions.
Oh, but he left politics a couple of years ago, he said.
Yeah. And I have a bridge.
It's just like, how many stories have you read about, the Koch brothers taking a break from politics? Cut me a fucking break.
It's never happening, because why would it? They have everything to gain, and they have really nothing to lose. The only thing they have to lose is, like, maybe every now and then they'll be uncomfortable, sweating bullets like Thiel was at a debate where student protesters show up or chanting outside. That's most that they have to worry about, and they have everything to gain. They have the chance to subjugate the political order.
Then they sponsor pundits and stuff that try to portray those protesters as, the greatest threat facing America, because it's which is really just, every time I hear that, I just think like, dude, you're telling on yourself right now. Like, you are you are so fucking comfortable that like somebody telling you you're a moron is like some sort of existential threat. I don't. But these are the people that fucking run everything. So
yeah, like the greatest threat. I really do believe the greatest threat right now that we face is Silicon Valley. Right, this is the greatest political problem we have to solve. How do you separate these people and their trillions of dollars from the technology that we could use to organize a better future, and from the political power that decides how, it gets designed and developed and financed and deployed? Until we figure out how that is going to happen, everything that happens is going to be, in one way or another, their design or response to their design, right? Because like you said, they have everything. They've won almost every single victory.
Yeah, and on the lowest level, you're responding to the influencers created on their technology, or the other, right? You know what I mean, on the real dirt and the lowest thing, right? Where some of the people we cover on this podcast, for example, are just, there's the kind of the kind of sludge that is pushed
made
out
in one of
by
their
the
labs.
Technology. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%.
So, Edward, we gotta let you go here, but in hopes of ending on a slightly optimistic note, this is some heavy stuff, and a lot of it is happening like well beyond the confines of, I think, just about anybody who would potentially listen to this in their life, right? These are decisions being made at the very tip top of society, sometimes on a global scale, with the buy-in of a government that has shown no interest in, stepping in and trying to regulate it. In fact, in many cases, it's shown the opposite interest. So what's the average person to do about all of this? I mean, it's I don't know that, any single person can stand up and say, like, it reminds me of the way that like weird right-wing people are like, I will not eat the bugs. I will not eat. I'm just like, I will not use the chat bot, which is unfortunately kind of all I've figured out for myself. But what's the average person to do about this kind of stuff?
I mean, it's hard because it's, really things can only be done collectively, and collective institutions are eviscerated and starved in this country and almost everywhere else, right? Because, in a workplace, it's like you can't do anything yourself, but, with a collective group of people, blocking the use of artificial intelligence, right? And getting that written into contracts, is something that you could do on a basic level, and trying to link together with as many groups as possible to do this. I think, to your question though, this is part of the larger thing, which is like, there is plenty of vaguely anti-tech fascist sentiment, right, that exists. I call myself a Luddite. I feel like there are plenty of Luddites, there are plenty of neo-Luddites, there are plenty of people who are skeptical of Silicon Valley and its ability and, its project of taking control of technological development and political power necessary to drive it. But we need more needs to be done to work on sort of culture, sort of praxis, sort of list of practical demands and actions that people can do in service of these larger aims, because of how much we're locked out of all of this, right? Because it's already a massive thing that we have to do, which is to convince people in politics and governance that Silicon Valley should not be the first, second, third, and fourth option for a partnership if you want to solve a political or social problem, right? That's so integral to a lot of this. And until people can even entertain that when they're in government, we can't even begin to start playing around with alternatives or the sort of hostile and oppositional activity towards Silicon Valley that we need to do to contest their power grab, right? But in the meantime, trying to build out and connect with and articulate, frustration with and anger with the way technological development is going and the way it's privately controlled and privately profited from, and finding other people who feel the same way and building collective groups to resist it in workplaces or public spaces or in universities or, wherever it's coming at you or for you is a good first step, because that sort of struggle, building up some groups or organizations, building ties with people, is what we need as the building block of some sort of movement, focusing on their ability to, dictate our technological future.
Edward, thanks so much for joining the show this week. Where can people find you, your writing, all that good stuff? You have a podcast.
Right. Yeah. I have a podcast. Very, very depressing one sometimes. It's about it's called This Machine Kills. I co-host it with Jathan Sadowski. We talk about the political economy of tech. I have a newsletter, The Tech Bubble, where I also write about political economy of tech. A little looser with it. And I'm on Twitter, Big Black Jacobin, right? That's pretty much most of the places where you'll find me
That's
ranting.
such a good handle.
Thank you. I know. I will never change it.